Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Sindhu Blume.
And I'm Scott McCandless. It is the week of November 25th, and this is your Monday briefing. There are 36 days left until the end of 2024, and 55 days until President-elect Trump is sworn into office. Between now and then, Congress has a few important details to wrap up.
Congress is out this week, but when it returns on December 2nd, they have 3 weeks of a lame duck session to address government funding before December 20th and respond to a request by President Biden for almost $100 billion in emergency disaster relief funding.
These two items may sound like a lot, and they are, but we haven't even mentioned dealing with an annual National Defense Authorization Act and legislation extending federal farm programs. And in the midst of everything last week, President-elect Trump nominated as Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, an investor and hedge fund manager.
Here to walk through the confirmation process for Treasury Secretary is Mark Prater. Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Sindhu. Scott.
So let's kick it off. So before we get into the mechanics of how the process works, what do you know about Bessent and how is he different than previous secretaries?
Treasury Secretary candidates tend to fall into 3 categories. Wall Street leaders, well-recognized ones at that, such as former Secretary Rubin and former Secretary Hank Paulson, or academic government service folks who played some role in financial market policy, etc. Secretary Janet Yellen is a good example of that one. And then third, business leaders, maybe not necessarily in the financial sector, but other sectors, such as former CEOs John Snow and Paul O'Neill. They tend to fall in those categories. Mr. Bessent falls in the first one. He's really, I think, a well-recognized Wall Street veteran, a person who comes with a lot of knowledge of financial markets.
Mark, you used to work on the Senate Finance Committee, and you have been through the nomination process many times, including for Treasury Secretary. Can you tell us a little bit about the process and what we might expect?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So the process is very, very thorough. There's a lot of vetting that goes on since it's really the top policy position on the economic side. And the Treasury Secretary has responsibility for taxes, finances, a number of things. So the standards are fairly high, and the staff will engage in vetting, a vetting exercise, which involves looking at the person's background. There's a questionnaire that's involved. Financial disclosures, all that kind of thing occurs mainly at the staff level. But then there are interviews in the process, and that really leads up to 2 critical events in the committee. One is the nomination hearing, which the nominee is grilled on their background, on policy matters, et cetera, whatever senators want to bring up. And then secondly is the markup of the nomination. So the committee is, the business before the committee is the approval of that nominee. Once approved, then the nominee goes to the Senate floor.
All right, and what about timing specifically for Mr. Bessent? Traditionally, a new administration wants to have all this wrapped up before Inauguration Day. So as Scott mentioned, there are a very limited number of days ahead of us. So what is the timing going to look like?
So, Sindhu, that's exactly right. You've got to think from the desired event, which is to have this position confirmed contemporaneously with the president's inauguration. And that's usually the goal. And so walking back from that, you've got to have the 2 events I talked about in the committee, and that would be the hearing and the markup. So the vetting really needs to start as soon as possible. And there are also a series of interviews and discussions that occur at the staff and member level. So it's really an important position. You don't like to leave it vacant.
Right.
Members are very focused on that. That and state are really those 2 positions they really want to have done by the time of the. Now, it doesn't mean sometimes there's controversy, and the controversy may slow that a little bit, but usually you find that the committee and the Senate will act pretty expeditiously.
Well, having been through 9 confirmations of Treasury Secretaries, between now and Inauguration Day, there is a likelihood that it could all get wrapped up.
That's right, Sindhu. The nominee will present a lot of data. They will. There's a questionnaire. There's an Office of Government Ethics form. A bunch of things that the nominee will have to fill out and then take questions on, et cetera. The staff will review that. They'll have questions. But again, if a nominee is well organized and the issues are kind of set, it could move pretty quickly.
Right. Mark, thank you so much. And great to have somebody who's been in the trenches with this talk about this. So thank you.
Thank you, Sindhu. Thank you, Scott.
Another big topic on our radar right now is tariffs. And Sindhu, you had a chance to talk with Chris Desmond about President-elect Trump's proposals for future tariffs.
I did. And he described the result of these proposals. The numbers would be staggering. And he specifically spoke about how it would impact the tax department and tax directors. So let's take a look at a clip.
Let's back up a little bit and let's go into the big picture. So what we're doing a lot of is modeling. We're modeling the potential impact. And if you think about it, the modeling of the impact is happening with the C-suite, logistics, supply chain, and they're figuring out what our options are. Because the modeling that we're doing for companies now, the numbers are a bit staggering because you think about this huge amount of additional costs where companies are really contemplating different operating model changes. So when that's happening, if you're the head of tax, you're looking at this saying, we might have some potential operating model changes, lift and shift of supply. We might onshore onto the US. What does this mean to my tax operating model, near and short term? And how do I react to it? And being a tax person myself most of my career as a transfer pricing economist, I always think of, well, what about all of your related party transactions and your documentation? Because if you have a pre-tariff impact and a post-tariff impact under the Trump administration, how does that vary to what I've done in my policy, my benchmarking? Sure. And how do I plan for that? But having a point of view from a tax director perspective on the different potential changes and being able to come to the table when a company has to look at the holistic picture and look at the net impact across the board. And then when they talk about a potential change to an operating model, what does that mean for costs, supply, logistics? When we get to tax, having that point of view from a tax perspective is going to be very important. So to get ahead of the analytics and those conversations would be a smart thing.
So that was a portion of the interview with Chris, and you can watch the rest of the interview right after this episode ends, or use the link included in the description of this episode.
It is Thanksgiving week here in the United States, and Sindhu, you have a tradition of asking Chairman Camp every year for a recommendation of his favorite pie. What was his response this year?
So this is a tradition going on 8 years, and I asked him this because it is a very important question. We emailed over the weekend, and this is what he said. Pecan pie. It stands on its own and doesn't need whipped cream or a scoop of ice cream or even a slice of cheddar. Not throwing apple under the bus, as I am especially sensitive to apple pie after all. All right, now I have to ask you, Mark, favorite pie?
Pumpkin pie.
Scott?
Well, I think I'll take apple back out from under the bus where Chairman Camp put it, and I'll put apple back on the table.
And I am pecan.
Perfect.
All right, thank you.
And because it is Thanksgiving week, we will resume coverage on December 2nd. You can catch up on the latest Week in Review with Andrew Pryor and our recent series focused on post-election impact on healthcare, policy, tax, and sustainability on our website.
And on behalf of the Policy on Demand team, happy Thanksgiving to our U.S. viewers and anyone else gathering to mark this holiday. We appreciate the time you spend with us. Take care.